You're watching a Highwire Media podcast.
Welcome to the True Crime Never Sleeps show. I'm your host, Larry Elise. And of course, on today's episode of Murder Monday, we dive into the murder of Barry and Honey Sherman. Just a trigger warning, this episode features discussions of suicidal ideation, so please listen with care. Keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Saying that's especially true when it comes to business, and let's face it, the more successful you get, the more friends and enemies you start to collect. Which was exactly what was happening to the victims in today's story. A powerful real estate mogul and his wife worked billions with their hands in so many different ventures that their suspect list reads like a game of Clue. Was it international assassins in the pool house with a rope? A scorned former employee in the bedroom with a gun? Contentious investment partner in the library with a candlestick? Unfortunately, this was the guessing game the public and the victim's family had to play, particularly because the police were of little help, dishing out half-baked theories that'll make you realize money can buy you friends and enemies, but it can't always buy you answers. So for today's case, we're traveling back to the summer of 1960 to Toronto, Canada. Walking the streets with a bag full of urine samples and a badge reading Empire Laboratories is 18-year-old Barry Sherman. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, Barry's more than happy to have taken his summer gig at his Uncle Lou Winter's pharmaceutical company, delivering urine for in-lab pregnancy tests. Remember, this is the 60s, so at-home tests just weren't a thing yet, which is why he's carrying urine around. Barry knows that if he can prove his worth, he'll climb the ladder fast here. Sure, nepotism was on his side, but Barry was also exceptional at math and science, so much that he'd already been attending the University of Toronto's engineering program for the last 2 years since he was 16 years old, making him the youngest person ever to be accepted into the program, at least at that time. While Barry doesn't know it yet, the summer job will change the course of his life forever, especially because retrieving urine samples will turn into pitching new pharmaceutical drugs to buyers, something Barry will later realize he has a strong passion for. But not before Barry explores a few other career paths first. Barry even goes on to spend a summer working for NASA before venturing on to MIT to receive his PhD in astrophysics. With experience like this, there's nearly no job in the world Barry isn't qualified for. Couldn't really imagine being that smart. You go work for NASA, MIT, it's like, what else can I do? Yet Barry keeps thinking about that one summer job with Uncle Lou. There's something about the pharmaceutical company that intrigues Barry. That feels like a new frontier, a new industry with endless possibilities and endless ways to make a profit. And lots of money with lots of drugs. Oddly enough, in 1965, the same year Barry graduates from MIT with a perfect 5.0 GPA, he receives a call that appears to be destiny. He's told his Uncle Lou has passed away at the age of 41 from an aneurysm. It's shocking and heartbreaking news for Barry, of course. The man he admires, who given him one of his first big opportunities, is gone. And Barry isn't going to let Empire Pharmaceuticals get sold for parts. So he takes what money he saved over the years, accepts a few loans from banks and family members, and recruits the help of his childhood friend, Joel Ulster. And then, in August of 1967, he and Joel buy Empire Pharmaceuticals. According to Barry, they got the company for a steal, mainly because it wasn't doing so hot at the time of Uncle Lou's death. Empire hadn't introduced any new products over the last few years. Its offices were in shambles, and the factories were using outdated machinery. I mean, basically, in Barry Sherman's own words, the company he had just bought was a disaster. Still, Barry saw merit in turning the operation around. At the time, there wasn't too many pharmaceutical companies making generic drugs. And by generic, I mean when you walk into a pharmacy and see the CVS brand as opposed to Tylenol. Same ingredients, just at a lower price. There was a sizable hole in the market at the time, and Barry Sherman was ready to plug it up. He even worked on opportunities for his cousins, Lou Winter's 4 young kids, so they wouldn't get burned in the deal. He promised there would be a job for them at Empire when the time came if they wanted it, and they'd each be able to purchase 5% of the company's shares if certain conditions were met. What Barry didn't realize was that soon he'd have his own little family to care for as well. 3 years after buying Empire, Joel's wife came to Barry and told him there was something she wanted him to meet. Candy striper at Toronto's Mount Sinai Hospital who was looking to meet a nice Jewish doctor. Well, before we move on, you're probably wondering what a candy striper is. He's actually a teenage volunteer hospital worker, and the reason they're called candy stripers is because the uniform they would wear was traditionally striped like some candies. Basically, a volunteer at a hospital who was looking to meet a nice Jewish doctor. Her name was Anna Reich, aka Honey. Now, Barry probably wasn't the kind of doctor Honey had in mind, but once they met, that no longer mattered to her. He was charmed by Barry, who, up until this point, had a little experience dating women, and Barry quickly fell head over heels for Honey, too. He loved how dedicated she was to giving back to her community, particularly after hearing her backstory. See, Honey had been born into a displaced persons camp in Austria after her parents were freed by the Allied forces during World War II. Then they immigrated to Canada with the help of a Jewish agency to start a new life. Barry's family proposed. Honey gladly accepted, and the two tied the knot on July 2nd, 1971. By the following year, Barry and Joel had turned Empire around, finally hitting about $2 million a year in sales. But now Barry was dreaming of starting up his own venture. So in 1973, he sold Empire to create his own pharmaceutical company from the ground up. He called it Apotex. Barry began gobbling up drug patents with the goal of making Apotex the largest generic drug manufacturer on the planet. By 2016, it was certainly one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in Canada, controlling about 40% of the market. They had over 10,000 employees manufacturing 25 billion doses of drugs a year, so they're huge. And the company was so ahead of the curve, they were even searching for ways to turn the active ingredients in marijuana into pill form. But the Shermans weren't growing their wealth. They were also growing their family at the time. Lauren, Jonathan, Alexandra, and Caitlin. While Barry buried his head in work, Honey consumed herself with motherhood and philanthropy. So it's reported that over their lifetime, the couple actually donated tens of millions of dollars to charities. And when Barry was once asked what he did for fun, his answer was, give money away. The two were particularly big supporters of the Jewish community, earning them the title of the King and Queen of Jewish fundraising. Honey herself sat on several boards, while the couple was said to write a check to almost anyone who needed assistance. What shocked so many people was how frugal the couple actually seemed to be in other areas of their life. Aside from a weekly housekeeper and a personal trainer, the couple didn't hire around-the-clock staff. And I know you're like, okay, this is crazy. These guys are billionaires. I mean, their company is worth billions. I mean, maybe not Jeff Bezos level high, but they're rich. And when they traveled, they preferred to fly coach, which is definitely a statement, like I said, considering that Barry's net worth in 2017 was close to $4.7 billion. I know a bunch of people will probably say, oh, well, they didn't want to waste money on private travel at first class, but I wouldn't have even gonna drop in a bucket to them. And maybe they're just, some people that you just like doing that, each their own, But I will say becoming a billionaire in this case required some sacrifices. According to some sources, Barry was rarely ever home, and it took a toll on his relationship with Honey and their kids, especially when Honey was diagnosed with cancer in 2015 and was left to rely on friends and her children to help fight her battle. When Barry did join the family for holidays and other important affairs, his head was usually buried in his briefcase or his ear glued to his cell phone. Many on the receiving end of those calls say that Barry was a completely different person when it came to business. If somehow in an alternate universe, True Crime Never Sleeps is ever worth $1 billion, you guys will see me not working anymore. I'll be doing something else. I'll be traveling. That's so much money, I would just be like, I'm done working. But according to people that he worked with, Barry was ruthless, and some former colleagues and adversaries had a few choice words to say about him. One claimed Barry was the only person they met with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. A University of Ottawa law professor once told the press that Barry was, quote, a deplorable human being, primarily because of the contentious industry he was in. Many felt that Barry was gouging the Canadian public on drug prices and manipulating the medical industry to line his pockets. I mean, truthfully, aren't all pharmacies doing that? He also claimed that Barry Sherman was never worried about the ethics of his company and that he didn't seem concerned about the opiate-based drugs he was manufacturing out of his company. The way he saw it, the doctors were the ones prescribing his medications. He just made the supply to meet the demand. While this corner of Barry's legacy is still hotly contested, there was one formidable side of Barry Sherman that no one could deny. See, Barry wasn't just investing in pharmaceuticals. He had all types of ventures in the works, many of which fell through. I often felt the wrath of Barry Sherman's legal team shortly after. The truth was, Barry would go to court over almost anything. Patents, disputes with his competitors, suspicions of corporate espionage, you name it. By 2017, he had an estimated 1,000 cases against the Canadian federal government alone, mainly over regulatory decisions against his company. In fact, Barry once joked to his employees that his company was a legal company that sold drugs on the side. Sometimes he'd even say things like, it would be easier for his adversaries to just knock him off than have to deal with him in court. But Barry Sherman didn't always get his way. In September 2017, he actually lost a court battle with the pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca and had to pay them about $300 million in damages. It was a major blow against the company's finances, equaling about a year in their development budget. As a result, Barry had to cut some of his side businesses loose to pay the fines, which likely made some people pretty unhappy, especially if they knew Barry and Honey were looking to move to a bigger $30 million home in one of Toronto's most exclusive neighborhoods. It was around November 2017 when Barry and Honey put their old mansion on the market. It was time to say goodbye to the houses they'd raised their children in, but their current home, equipped with a tennis court, 6-car garage, and even an indoor swimming pool, would be a trailer compared to the new house they were building, living the high life. With the holiday season approaching, the house sat on the market for longer than the couple would have expected. But on December 13th, they traded the morning like any other. Barry spent an hour from 8:30 to 9:30 working with their personal trainer. While he complained per usual, their trainer Denise Gold reminded him it was Honey's wish that he would take better care of himself. While Barry could be a formidable workaholic, everyone knew he would do absolutely anything to make Honey happy. So he pushed through with Denise, claiming that he seemed even chattier today than most days. Once he finished, Barry showered and took off for the office, but not before kissing Honey goodbye. She said she'd see him there in a few hours. They had a meeting with the contractors to go over the plans for their new house. Honey spent the next few hours packing for a girls' trip to Miami and making sure everything was ready for Barry for the day she'd be gone. Then around 5 p.m., she got in her car and drove over to the office. Between 5:30 and 6:30, Barry and Honey met in the boardroom with their contractors. Then she left the office around 6:30, but Barry told her it was going to be a late night. He stuck around and sent off a few more emails before picking up his briefcase around 8:30 p.m. to head home. The following morning on December 14th, several employees noticed that Barry wasn't at his desk. Now, it wasn't unusual for Barry to take his time coming into the office, but the fact that he had responded to their emails the night before set off alarm bells. Barry would respond almost immediately, no matter the time. That same morning, Honey also failed to show up for a committee meeting that she was a part of. But he did go to his personal trainer, correct? The morning before? Others suspected that Honey just had a doctor's appointment and failed to inform them that she'd be missing that week's session. Even the Sherman's daughter, Alex, began to wonder by Thursday evening why she hadn't heard back from her parents. Just last night, she'd sent them pictures of her new baby, and they never passed up an opportunity to fawn over their grandchild. Still, Alex figured she'd give it another day. She was going to see her mother on the afternoon of Friday, December 15th anyways. Well, when that morning came around, a cleaning lady showed up at the Sherman home at around 8:30 a.m. for her weekly appointment. She got right to work, but that's when she heard a cell phone ringing. She followed the sound and noticed Honey's cell was sitting in the powder room floor. Only there was no sign of Honey. The cleaning woman eventually made her way to the primary bedroom to find that the bed was still made. It didn't appear to have been slept in the night before, which was unusual. Typically, the Shermans left the bed unmade so she could change the sheets. So she just wondered, did they forget she was coming? Well, apparently she wasn't the only one who wondered this, because around 10 a.m., the couple's real estate agent, Elise Stern, arrived. She had tried to reach the couple a few times to see if she could show the house that afternoon. Figuring the couple was just busy with work, she decided to invite the clients over and their agent over anyway and began touring them around the house. Shortly after, Elise, eager to show them one of the main features of the home, led the buyers down to the basement pool room. When she opened the glass door, she spotted Barry and Honey along the far side of the swimming pool. She apologized to them, turned to the couple, and said the Shermans appeared to be practicing yoga, so they'd revisit the room later. So they were there, in the pool room. They just were not replying to anyone. Well, as Elise led them back upstairs, she realized something just didn't seem right. So she went back down for a better look and realized Barry and Honey Sherman were seated in front of the pool, their legs outstretched, and both of their necks were tied with leather belts to the railing next to the pool. They were still wearing the same outfits they'd been spotted at on Wednesday afternoon for their contractor meeting. The 75-year-old Barry's face looked unharmed, The 70-year-old Honey had a fresh injury to her face, and it was obvious to Lace that both had been dead for some time. By 11:43, police were dispatched to the Shermans' home. After countless hours of assessing the scene, one homicide detective came before the media to say, 1, there appeared to be no forced entry into the home, and 2, they weren't looking for any suspects at the time. Now, anyone who knew the Shermans said the no forced entry thing meant nothing. The Shermans, especially Honey, would open their home to any stranger that came knocking. Fortunately, their property was also void of outdoor security cameras, which meant anyone coming and going might have been able to do so completely unnoticed. It is kind of surprising for especially at 2017 and being rich that didn't have any cameras around. But I guess, since they are in their 70s, that they probably just think, they're in a super nice area. What's going to happen? But what really shocked the public was the second statement that the police weren't looking for any suspects at the time. Mainly because they had already formed a theory that that was going to prove hard for them to shake. Police felt confident this was 100% a murder-suicide. Now, the strange thing about this case is when you have one high profile as this, investigators usually pull out the big guns, right? Like all hands on deck. Let's use all the resources we've got to find the culprits and look like heroes. So it's weird that Toronto police are not only quick to close the book on this one, like murder-suicide done, they also seem to really drag their feet when it comes to doing any real investigating. For example, security at a company hands them over the security footage just days after the death to see if there was any suspicious activity around the offices. Only police didn't get into those tapes until well over a month later. In January 2018, a similar situation happened with one of the Shermans' neighbors. Right after the Shermans died, they said their security cameras captured some strange activity happening in front of the Shermans' home on December 14th. This was the day before they were found. The video showed a dark 4-door car driving up and down the street, and a man who appeared to enter the house 3 times over half an hour. Now, you'd think this would be a massive piece of evidence that the police should have been rushing to collect. Only they didn't. Instead, the neighbors had to call the police several days in a row to ask if they were coming to get the tape, mainly because every 7 days the footage was written over by the next week's surveillance. They've got to be involved. They've got to be a payoff. It's got to be some mob stuff going on somewhere. It was around the 6th day when the police finally came to collect the evidence, which I get that there's probably a lot for police to comb through. Maybe they just don't have the manpower to be on top of everything. But according to several sources, they dropped the ball in other areas as well. For months, they didn't obtain any DNA or fingerprints from people who had come and gone from the Sherman household around the time they disappeared, which you would think would be the first thing they would do so they could eliminate people as suspects. And the Shermans had a lot of people coming and going between real estate agents, prospective buyers, contractors, housekeepers, personal trainers, family, friends. That's a lot of potential witnesses and suspects to rule out. Plus, those who worked with Barry, either at his company or other ventures, waited months to finally give their side of the story to authorities. But it seemed like the pressure of the private investigation finally got to the Toronto police, because on January 26, 2018, the lead homicide detective finally admitted they, too, had dropped the suicide theory, and now believed they were dealing with a double homicide. So now they're on board. It just took a long time. Of course, the media went wild with theories about who could have been responsible, and all kinds of stories began to unfold, ranging from international assassins to Hell's Angels to the Clinton administration, none with any merit, of course, probably because the truth was much likely closer to home, which I feel like it always is. Kidnappings, anything like this, it's always much closer to home than people realize. A lot more conspiracy theory than our usual cases, like a competitor in the pharmaceutical business or something like that, which could be. Or, of course, the Clinton administration. Just kidding. Highly unlikely that it was the Clinton administration. I mean, to be honest, you just never know. With all these pharmaceutical companies and billionaires, there's so many people that probably want to kill them. But one of the few suspects that stood out to both police and the Sherman family was someone Barry had recently been ensnared in a legal battle with. Lou Winter's sons, Jeffrey and Carrie Winter. Which, this is actually really sad because now that means he's in a legal battle with his cousins. In 2011, Barry's cousins sued him, stating that he had used the money from the sale of their father's company to create Apotex. In their eyes, they were entitled to their share of Sherman's new corporation. Carrie claimed that Barry had failed to honor the agreement they made with Barry Empire. Guaranteed job and company shares, and that Barry had made a handshake deal he never honored to instead give them 20% ownership stake in Apotex, which is hard. Handshake deals don't mean crap usually, depending. It's just so hard when you're talking about that much money. Barry, of course, denied the clause ever existed and claimed the two companies were not intrinsically tied. Things got so heated, they eventually made their way to court, but Barry ultimately won the battle, as this alleged agreement couldn't be found anywhere in writing. Now, as I mentioned, Barry made a lot of enemies in the courtroom. The one that stood out as a bit more threatening, particularly because Carrie admitted when he heard about Barry and Honey's death, his mind went right to his brother Jeffrey. Apparently, Jeffrey had expressed interest in killing Barry during their heated legal battle. But when Carrie confronted Jeffrey, he claimed he had absolutely nothing to do with it. In fact, he hadn't even heard the news yet that a cousin had died. There was one other strange thing Carrie mentioned to reporters, though. He said that back in the late 90s, when he and Barry were close, Barry had asked him to arrange a contract killing of Honey. So his cousin came forward and says, yeah, back in the 90s when I was close with Barry, he asked me to arrange a killing of his wife. According to Carrie, Barry often complained about being unhappy with his marriage and was looking for a way out while still keeping all of his money. Carrie even said he contacted someone who could help Barry, only Barry never followed up with a contract killer. Of course, there's absolutely no evidence to back up what Carrie said, and when asked if he thought Barry might have just been kidding about killing his wife, he admitted, yeah, maybe. Still, Carrie insisted that he had absolutely nothing to do with Barry and Honey's death, despite admitting to the fact that he had fantasized about killing them both at one point. What is clear, however, is that the Winter family believed Barry Sherman had stolen their future from them. That they would have been able to live off their father's fortune and Barry not gobble up the business and sold it off for parts. The motive alone wasn't enough for police to close in on the Winter family, particularly because a lot of people had tenuous relationships with the billionaires, including a man named Frank D'Angelo. Frank was, let's just say, a jack of all trades, a singer, movie producer, restaurant owner, juice maker, and a beer baron, but most importantly, a charmer who seemed to have found a soft spot in Barry Sherman's heart. The pair met in 2001 when Frank's apple juice company was looking for a processing plant. At the time, Barry owned a bankrupt factory in Ontario, and a mutual friend suggested the two should meet up. And the rest was history. Despite having a criminal background, Barry took a strong liking to Frank, mainly because he was a guy who always had good ideas, but never knew how to make them a reality. But Barry did, and he began investing in a variety of Frank's ventures, from movies to beer to soft drinks. Problem was, Frank didn't quite understand how to keep many of these businesses alive once they were off the ground, and he had a hard time paying Barry back, like $100 million worth of a hard time. So over time, Barry could no longer justify always bailing Frank out. To clean up some of the mess, Barry put his son Jonathan in charge of Frank's beer company, and asked Frank to take a step back in some of his other ventures, declaring bankruptcy on a few in 2007. And as a courtesy, he offered Frank a monthly allowance, and while Frank tried to get Barry to change his mind, saying that profits were just around the corner, Barry was hesitant. Over the years, he did end up reinvesting with Frank, even though Jonathan widely discouraged it. Now I know you're probably wondering why Frank's name comes up when people talk about suspects, but it's mainly because the Sherman children pegged him as the most likely possibility after their parents died. So the family members feel like Frank could be a suspect. They've openly theorized that Frank was involved, or at the very least, might have roped Barry into a shady deal that eventually got him and Honey killed. They even refused to let Frank come to the couple's funeral, but many, including the police, think Frank is an unlikely culprit. While Barry died, Frank's cash flow stopped, and Frank insisted Barry was a close friend, like a brother to him. Plus, he had an alibi at the time of their death. His alibi? He was playing in a local hockey league around the supposed time of the murders, which I just had to include because this is all in Canada, and of course he was playing in a hockey league. Now, Frank wasn't the only potential sketchy character that Barry did business with. Barry had his hands in all kinds of failed projects, from dating apps to brokering yachts to real estate investments, many of which ended up in court. Like I said, causing Barry to collect more enemies. In fact, on the day Barry Sherman died, its lawyers filed a lawsuit against a trivia game company that he'd invested in. Needless to say, Barry's portfolio sounded like a bit of a mess. But there have been other theories over the years, like the possibility that this was some kind of robbery gone wrong. After all, there had been over 160 reported break-ins around the Shermans' neighborhood in the year before their death. So the way you're going with this right now is this is a cold case, because now all the conspiracy theories come up. And how is that possible? Like, how does a billionaire get murdered and no one has any idea who did it? That is bullcrap. There's no possible way that can happen, but that is reality. That's what's happening, right? That's what's happening here. So the burglary theory, the Sherman's house had actually been burglarized just the year before when thieves dropped through the skylights. So was it possible that the Shermans just happened to catch a robber in the act? Maybe, but others say their death might have been meant to send a message. With the Shermans being such strong supporters of the Jewish community, there have been a few who've wondered if this was some sort of anti-Semitic attack against the couple. Of course, there's been very little evidence to support this claim either. But in 2019, the Toronto police announced they did have a theory about what might have happened and who might have done it. Only they've never shared that theory public, out of fear that it might be muddling the investigation. So in 2021, however, they did release an important piece of evidence that could shine a light on the couple's killer. That video, taken from the neighbor's security camera, remember one they almost didn't collect? It was finally revealed. It showed what appeared to be a man between 5'6" and 5'9" in black pants with a black jacket with a hood pulled over his head, and he's walking around in front of the Sherman house around the time the murders took place. To this day, police have not been able to determine who the person was, but they feel confident that this individual is not local to the neighborhood. In fact, since their deaths, no one has been arrested in the case of Barry and Honey Sherman, though many believe that the couple likely knew their killer, or at the very least, the killer knew them. Whoever entered the house knew that both Barry and Honey would be home around the same time that night, something that didn't happen very often since the two had such busy schedules. They also knew how to get into the house or how to be invited in without having to force their way. And chances are they weren't very seasoned at staging a murder-suicide considering the mistakes they left behind, like the marks around the wrists and the lack of broken hyoid bones. This still hasn't brought the family any closer to getting answers they deserve. Jonathan Sherman is offering a $35 million reward to anyone with a tip. That might lead to the arrest of his parents' killer. So, of course, if you or anyone you know has information about the Shermans, you can email shermantips@torontopolice.on. or call Crimestoppers at 416-222-8477. And that is the case of Barry and Honey Sherman. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think happened? Do you think it was a murder-suicide? Do you think it was a competitor? Do you think it was the mob? Do you think it was the Clinton administration? Let me know. Of course, give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the bell notification button to be notified of future videos. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you in our next episode.